What is up, everybody? Mark on the mic here. Across from me, we have Mr. Slingin Rik. And
hello, everybody.
We're going to talk about some last-minute rut tactics. Now, Eric, we did a podcast,
a week ago.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago, whatever. Late October, whitetail tips. If you're listening to this right now, you either just love whitetail hunting and you'll absorb any amount of information, or some of those tips didn't work and you still have a buck take in your pocket. At press time, this podcast is launching on November 5.
I love it.
So that's kind of the heart of the rut, but we're doing these tips in case, sometime between maybe the 5 and the 5th and the 10th, which was what I consider just the heart of the rut.
I have that week off work. I cannot wait. I'm so excited.
I'm so jacked. But alas, Eric, there's been many a year where once I get beyond that 10th time frame,
you hit the panic button.
I hit the panic button. I still have that buck tag in my pocket. I've been hunting hard. I've maybe burnt out some of my my A spots.
And yourself out.
And myself. And I'm on plan. I don't even know what yet because I don't know what day or time it is. And like you said, the panic button is hit, and I really want to get a buck with my bow.
We're going to have some tips that come out of this that are going to help that situation not happen.
Woo! Yeah. I've got a few things written down here, and frankly, they aren't asking for a friend; they're asking for myself. So, Eric,
you are a friend, Mark.
Yeah. There you go. So, what would you consider? Last minute, maybe late rut tips.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and we'll get into all of these, but in no level of
I didn't mean the tips. I meant time frame. Frame. Sorry, I used the wrong word.
Late rut, like late in the rut?
Or late in the primary rut, I guess.
So what date would you say? Would you say like the 15th through the 25th, that 10-day window? Is that kind of what you're calling late rut-ish?
Yeah, that's what I'd call it.
Okay.
I mean, Let's break this time. Let's go the 10th through the 25th. Let's talk about this within that context.
10th through the 25th. So I would take that 10th through the 25th. I'd cut it in half. Your first, several days, I think you're still in some pretty dang good hunting.
Yeah, for sure.
And in Wisconsin, we have the we have the addition of gun season coming in that window, which definitely changes things. If you're living in a state like Iowa where you have the full month of November to hunt, I would think about that 10th through the 25th as just, hey, that's still heydays. Prime time, go time. Every day can be a kill day.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, for me, the big thing of, we kind of talked to it, is not burning yourself out. Because I think that is actually more detrimental than burning out your best spots.
Wow. Okay.
It is so easy to get yourself just wore down. You're mentally drained. You're not eating and drinking like you should be. Because you're sitting in a tree for long hours. If you're driving a long way in the morning and evening, like that adds into it.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing is to not let that happen to yourself. And there are things that you can do. Taking a reset day. I actually think taking a reset day is probably the best thing that you can do. If you have an extended rut vacation, a reset day can be huge.
Yep.
In the last 3 years, I've killed 2 bucks on what I call reset days, where I've not hunted in the morning or gone in at maybe 10:30 in the morning and just kind of scouted my way in. You approach it differently. You feel better. You feel more, mentally and just physically rested. And I think you hunt different when you're feeling good.
So. 100. If your mind's in the game, you're in the game. And if you don't, I mean, and I've hunted those days where I'm like, I actually don't want to be here right now, which is then of course it's over and you're like, how could I have ever felt like that?
Because in the here and now, you look at it as, man, this time comes once a year. How can I miss any waking second in the woods? I hear that. I feel that. I've been there and done it too. And on to that point, when I do hunt, during that, any time in November, really, if I have the day to give it, I won't leave the woods unless I feel like I absolutely need to. So that means bringing lunch, bringing food, plenty of water with you. And don't make it like don't make it a marathon that is gonna just totally drain yourself. Get down, midday and have a sandwich. Like maybe move a little bit. Move 10, 15 yards where you've been seeing that buck cross that trail. Like those micro adjustments like that, which is another thing I want to get to. Whether it is that 10th through the 17th or 17th through the 25th, it doesn't really matter. Like micro adjustments during the rut, I think are something that's super important. An example I have on that was a couple of years hunting down in Illinois a couple of years ago. I hunted, it was an all-day sit, but I moved my saddle location 3 times that day and maybe a total distance of 50 yards before I finally killed a buck that day.
Wow.
So it was a spot where I got in there at first light. I knew there was the pretty good trail that was coming off like this big bedding area. These bucks were cruising this downwind side of a doe bedding area. I was set up off that. I was probably a little too conservative in my initial setup. Had a nice buck go by at like 40 yards. After that, I got down maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock, moved 20 yards closer. Had a family group of does come by with a young buck behind them, maybe like 1 o'clock, and they were in range, but it just wasn't like a perfect shot. They came in kind of facing me, so I'm like, I gotta move just a little bit. That final move was maybe a 10-yard adjustment, and then an hour after that, I had a buck come right down that trail, shot him at 8 yards. It was perfect.
So that would have been about what?
Probably about 2:30, 3 o'clock.
Interesting.
I think it was 3:07. I took a picture of my bow without an arrow on it.
How far into this piece were you? Were you pretty deep? Were you pretty aggressive with as far as, at least in relation to like how far you pushed in on where you thought these deer might be?
Yeah, it was. It was a pretty small property, all things considered, and there were 2 main access points, and basically there was an access point on one side of it and then on the opposite. So basically you had roads on the west and the south sides, and I was trying to get into that northeast corner, which would have been furthest from any of the parking spots, but there were people hunting all over in that stuff. So I just kind of narrowed down this one little pocket. There were existing tree stands, ladder stands that people had up. You can do that in Illinois. You can leave your stands up like overnight and whatnot.
Gotcha.
And there was a existing ladder stand. I never saw anybody in it. I'm assuming it was like a gun set or something like that. But I was maybe 40 yards from that set, and that's where I ended up killing that deer. So it was definitely a situation where it was pressured. There were a lot of people there, but there, for whatever reason, was this pocket of deer activity that I kind of honed in on. It took the full, I think it took 7 days of hunting that piece every single day before I finally like really narrowed in on that pocket. And I had a really good encounter with a buck that I should have killed. My wind swirled, and he scooted out of there. But again, everything kind of boiled down. I narrowed this property. It was 1,500 acres down into 10 that I was really concerned about, and just commit to that. If you feel like, hey, that spot has everything you need, don't overthink that. Just keep hunting it. Like eventually something is going to happen.
Okay, so. Gotcha. Yeah, I want to jump back to like when you're talking about a reset day. Yeah. It doesn't mean, oh, you're taking the entire day off. You're watching football all day. It's like, I mean, just simply, and I do this a fair amount, maybe, but simply just not burning the candle at both ends. Like a reset day is not getting up at 0 dark 30. And then, like you said, you can go in, you can scout your way in. You're going to see stuff that you're not going to see in the dark. Maybe that's you're going to get tipped off to whatever sign or trail or something you didn't see before, and that makes the difference.
The best example I have on a reset day was November 10th of 2017. I had the week off that week. The 10th fell, I think, like on Friday or Thursday. So it was like after hunting, for quite a few days. And I just wasn't getting in anything. I went in and on the evening of the 9th, it rained. And it rained into the morning of the 10th. So I'm like, I'm not going to go out there and get soaked. I'm going to sleep in. I think I slept in, 7, 8 o'clock. Woke up, kind of did a cruise around this like big chunk that I knew, you know, a lot of people were hunting, marked where people were at, and finally found a spot where no one was. And it was a piece I'd never been into before. Went in and just kind of like snuck my way in. I remember I dressed like super light that day because I wanted to be pretty mobile, and I was way underdressed when I finally got set up. But basically walked past all these like fresh rubs and scrapes that all looked really good, and finally, you know, I ended up all, you know, things considered, not going in super far in from the parking lot. I think it was maybe, you know, a half mile from the parking lot.
Okay.
And got set up, had a big family group of does come by at like noon, and then at, you know, 1:30, 2 o'clock, this beautiful heavy 8-pointer came, you know, basically cross-sectioning those doe trails and came right past the tree, shot him, and it was a spot where I had never been before. I attribute that whole hunt into going in with like a fresh, open mindset, because if I would have went into that spot after like scouting it a lot, I wouldn't have hunted there. You know, I would have thought it was too close to the road.
Oh, okay.
I would have like looked at this back corner that's way off and it's hard to get to, and I would have like just went there. But because I went through everything in the daylight, I could see stuff. I could adjust to sign. Because it rained too, I was super quiet getting in, and I just didn't have an agenda. You know, I was simply walking through the woods with everything I needed to get in a tree, waiting to find a spot that looked good, and then that was my litmus test. Once I found that, boom, up you go, and it worked. So I think a lot of times, like, I know myself specifically, I will overthink it like crazy. I'll look at the map, and maybe it's kind of an odd-shaped property, and there's like a weird little like section that goes deep in, and it's like the hardest section to get to, and I'll always highlight that and be like, oh, I got to get right there. During the rut, I don't think that matters as much.
Okay.
Get in the woods, find what you think is hot right here and now today, and hunt that stuff versus like letting a digital phone screen dictate where you go.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you are going in and all signs point to yes, like.
Yeah. Don't overthink it.
Don't overthink it. Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, you're talking about sign as it does get later, you know, and we'll probably bounce back and forth a little bit, you know, with time frames and just as stories come up. But as it gets a little bit later, maybe like, you know, 15th and on, what does that sign mean to you? Like rubs, maybe find some scrapes.
I don't think it means a whole lot. What I'm more so, and the reason I say that is like rubs and scrapes, you know. Break that down by month. Okay, September there are the fewest amount of rubs and scrapes, you know, than you're gonna have all season out there. So anything you find in, like, let's say September 15th, you find a rub, like, you know that happened within the last week. You know,
Sure.
Now jumping ahead to November 15th, if you find a rub, like that, you might be looking at something 2 months old if it doesn't look super super fresh. That said, like if I walk past a scrape and it's very clearly recently been hit, that means a whole lot more than like what I call the frustration scrape on the field edge that, you know, maybe has some leaves in it. That scrape probably got opened up in early October and hasn't really been hit a whole lot since then. But now you find this big community scrape back in the woods that like is clearly still getting hit. That scrape is way far going to outweigh the just like frustration scrape on the field edge. So I would look at hunting that,
right?
But I just wouldn't. You know, it would need to have a whole lot of other features like terrain features that would make deer concentrated into that section. The community scrape just on a standalone isn't something that I would be like, okay, that's all I need to see. Like knowing that it is the rut and deer, you know, bucks are specifically cruising different areas, I'm going to want more than just like one signpost feature, a rub, a scrape, whatever. Like I need terrain to dictate where the deer are going to want to be.
Gotcha.
So you put that scrape in the middle of like a great terrain trap or funnel or pinch point, saddle, whatever. Yeah, I'm going to hunt that. You just put that out in the middle of like a wide open ridge top. I don't know. You know, you might throw a sit at it, but I'm not going to get super committed to it.
Gotcha. By this time, you know, that 15th time frame, we'll say, you've been hunting a lot. You've probably hit a lot of, you know, what I call your A spots. You know, maybe you've done some scouting, maybe you had some cameras out. For whatever reason, maybe you've probably seen some deer, just haven't been able to close it, but they're not paying off.
Yep.
Are you just sticking with the tried and true because you know that they can produce, or how much are you bouncing around?
I am bouncing around quite a bit.
That's hard to do.
It is hard to do. So another example, November 18th, a couple of years ago, I didn't fill a bow tag in Wisconsin. And I took that tag down. I mean, I actually hunted all the way till January 10th and had a spiker come by on the 10th that busted me at full draw. Different story. But anyways, it was Friday.
That's the late non-rut.
Yeah. That's the third rut.
Yeah.
So I took that bow tag right down until the opening day of Wisconsin gun deer season. I actually took the Friday or the Thursday, whatever it was, before the gun opener off. I want to say it was the 18th. And I set up in a spot that I had hunted in the past. I saw a buck go into this bedding area. He was maybe like 200-ish yards through the timber. I didn't get a great look at him. I just knew it was a buck and something that I was interested in. He went into this like thick, overgrown CRP, like, kind of like thicket with a lot of like multiflora rows. And I knew once he got in there, assuming that he kept going into that bedding area, it would have been really hard for him to see me moving around in the open hardwoods. So as soon as I saw him go in there, I tore down my saddle and just like made a beeline right for that edge. Got set up on that edge, and I ended up just sitting on the ground.
Oh, really? Okay.
This is probably around like 10 o'clock in the morning, and the only reason I did that is I didn't want to take I knew he was just there, and I didn't want to take even the 5 minutes of getting set up in the tree, thinking that, maybe if I make any like, excessive noise, that might be all it takes to get him to pop out.
Right.
So I just sat there, kind of like crunched under a deadfall. I had my bow ready. And maybe after sitting there about like 30, 35 minutes, that buck actually came and worked that downwind side of the CRP thicket where it met the open timber.
Okay.
And he was just in far enough where I couldn't get a shot at him. He was a nice buck. It was, probably 3-4-year-old, like 140-inch 9-pointer.
Oh, wow.
Like
Jeez.
really good deer,
Yeah.
And hindsight, what I should have done is pushed in even closer to that edge. I think what I ended up doing is I wanted to stay in the open timber and be able to see into it just for the benefit of being able to see. I think a lot of times hunters, myself included, will opt for visual appeal than they will for like functional appeal of a spot. What I mean there is like everyone wants to see deer. But a lot of times there's a difference between like seeing deer and killing deer. So if I would have maybe gone in another 20 yards, I would have taken my shot windows from like being able to maybe shoot, 40, 45 yards through the nice, beautiful oak timber to now I can only shoot 10 to 15 yards on this very specific trail, but it's in the bedding area. You're committing to that, but you're probably committing to a higher odds situation.
Right. And, it's like, what do you want to... Sometimes that depends on how much time you have, too. Like, if you're like, hey, I'm going to play it a little bit conservative, and I might see what happens here, and then you're able to, capitalize on that the next day. But like you said, though, like you saw that buck, he's there. You're either... I see where you're going with that, like, make your move, push your chips in, and, make the best call. Totally.
So, and I actually I hung then a saddle right after he came by because I'm like, hey, he came by once. I'm going to get in a situation where I can get right on that X where he was at, get up in that tree. And I saw a couple other small bucks the rest of the day, but he never showed back up.
Did you try calling
I did.
At all?
Yeah,
Okay.
As soon as I got set up, I hit the antlers together, and I was just like on pins and needles. I'm like, I know he's in the area. You got to think he assumed that he heard it, and I just sat there for 30 minutes after I rattled and no dice.
Yes. The eternal frustration of whitetail hunting. Food, water, bedding.
Bedding.
Okay.
Although, if we're talking that late time of year, that like late rut, I actually might opt towards food.
Probably more on an evening sit.
On an evening sit, yeah. And I think that's mainly, related to does hitting those food sources.
Right.
And you're just hoping that a buck is going to want to like still be looking for any stragglers that are, still in heat. Or, the other side of that is he's just so wore down. He needs they still need to eat.
Right.
If you got a hot food source, maybe it's a cut cornfield. You got a bunch of does hitting that every night. Like that'd probably be something that I would look into. But I'd want to make sure that like you're in an area where you're not just like sitting there and observing. Like I'd want to be in the game somehow, whether that means bringing in a decoy, or really like identifying that trail that the deer are entering into that field and setting up right on that. I think you got to like be aggressive. You always err on the side of aggression rather than being passive that time of year.
Right.
So
right. What about water? What have you seen as far as like, I know particularly on private, a lot of folks are, putting in water holes in strategic spots. Yep. Let's talk about that. But then I also want to talk about maybe creek bottoms. Like here in our region, we'll have not a lot, but you'll see like almost like marshy areas with a creek that goes through it. And there's some trees along the creek that you could get into it. Potentially there's a trail running along that creek or something like that. Yep. Let's talk a little bit about water and what you think about that.
Yeah, I think water's awesome. I think it's definitely something that you shouldn't overlook. A couple of years, like this is maybe 10 years ago now, but I used to hunt a spot in southeast Wisconsin. And it was a small private piece, 40 acres. It was a really like narrow, it was an odd shaped property. It was 20 acres wide by 80 acres deep. So it was a very long rectangle. So you didn't really have a whole lot of like, and it laid out like north to south, so like you didn't have a whole lot of east-west like room to roam, but you could go in really deep. And on the west boundary of the property, there was like a pond. It was on the neighbors. It was like a marshy pond. It actually held water throughout the year. I mean, and it was probably 3-4 acres in size, pretty decent size, like water source. And that's the summer of whatever year it was, I put a kiddie pool, like literally just the things you would buy at like Walmart or Menards that like you set up for your dog or your kids, whatever, in the backyard. I dug one of those in, put pea gravel over the top, and then filled it up with water. And I remember being really hesitant whether or not it was going to work because I had that big primary water source on the west boundary of the property.
Right.
But it was maybe no bigger than like the size of the table we're standing around right now. And that thing was such a draw to deer. There were does hitting that thing literally every single day throughout the rut. There were bucks coming in, not necessarily drinking out of it, but they were using it as like a communication hub. So because there were so many does frequenting that I called it the pond. It was not a pond. It was a kiddie pool. Because there were so many does hitting that thing, bucks would just come through, scent check it, and be like, hey, who's been here recently or any of them in heat? I'm going to go, figure out where they're at. So that was a great spot to like hunt at any time of the year.
Interesting. Were they laying any sign down by the water?
Yeah, there was a lot. I mean, there were rubs and scrapes. Like if you did a 50-yard radius around it, there were rubs and scrapes kind of all over the place. But I think the biggest draw was just the water is like, hey, I know there are does hitting this every day. I'm going to go see who was here and when they were here. So
what about, like a marshy creek bottom? It's got some, usually they're a little bit, more scraggly type trees. It looks open, but it's not open. Yep. Got cattail stuff, tall grass, oftentimes taller than the deer themselves, but do you find good trails like paralleling those?
Paralleling and more on the edges of it, I think.
Okay.
So, my mind has taken me to a spot that I've talked to you about quite a bit of this public piece in the area here, where there's a very secluded water source on the property.
Oh.
And there's definitely trails that go across a lot of the cattails and marsh grass that get into it, but the best trails are on the edges of these hardwood fingers that kind of jet into the swamp.
Okay.
So the water there is, I could be wrong about this, but I'm treating that area more as like a bedding area than I am like a water source. The water is there as a byproduct of the cover that it creates. If that makes any sense. So like the water is there because it's like a marshy drainage. Yeah, I'm sure they're drinking that water But I think the reason those deer are sucked into that area is it's just really hard to get to. In fact, I lost a pair of boots in there. There's a pair of lacrosse Alpha Burleys still cemented in the earth out there.
Some future civilization may find those boots and
fossilized.
They're gonna be like, "Oh, this poor soul," but he got out.
Yeah. So that's the kind of spot this place is, but it's really difficult to hunt because I haven't spent as much time as I should in that area. There's a lot of deer in it, and there's a lot of deer like kind of right now in my mind not really using any rhyme or reason of how they travel through it. I'm sure if I spent a little bit more time and dug into like why they're doing what they're doing, and the wind directions that make them kind of do different behaviors, I'm sure I'd be able to figure it out a little bit more. But right now it's just to me it's kind of random movement going through that area.
Well, I mean, I think that spot, and maybe this is somewhat in of a tip itself, because I've seen on the map where you're talking about, and yes, it makes sense that deer are there, but very difficult for people to get back in there. In fact, I'm not sure anybody's been back there since you lost your boots, sort of thing. So deer like to go places where they're not bothered and they know they're safe and they don't have to worry about anything back there. And you'd have to really, I mean, frankly, you'd have to want it, right? And risk losing your boots. And I mean, honestly, the spot like that, that's even, I mean, from a safety standpoint, a little bit sketchy, When it comes to, I lost my train of thought because I'm thinking of actually a spot that I went into just the other day, and it was hardwoods along a marsh, and so I went through the woods to get in because I was kind of more scouting than you certainly weren't going to be quiet. Sure. I mean, it was an absolute mess in there. Yeah. There were deer trails, not a ton of sign, a lot of honeysuckle, some hardwoods, and I got to a spot where there were a couple trails, I guess, cutting along the hill. There were a couple trails going straight up the hill, kind of from the marsh to the top. It's a pretty thin strip of trees, thick as all get out. Didn't really find any buck sign, but I got to this point kind of like on the roll of a hill, fairly soft, where a couple good shooting lanes and a couple good trails, and your shot's going to be 20 yards. It's kind of like that spot you're talking about where you're like, you are hunting this spot, and the deer is going to enter this window, and maybe you'll get 10 yards before the window to be like, oh, God, here, one's coming. What are your thoughts on that? Knowing, I think the best way in is actually to go on the low side in the marsh grass. You're still going to make some noise. I guarantee you're going to blow some deer out on your way in.
That's a tough scenario.
Couple hundred yards.
Couple hundred yards of walking through the marsh.
Mm-hmm.
That is a tough scenario. And there's no other way to come in through open hardwoods and get down to the edge without, blowing up the marsh.
If you go through the woods, you're popping and breaking sticks and going through stuff and getting hung up on stuff. I think the deer are getting through fine, but as a person, you're going to be having some trouble. Yeah.
What I'd probably do in a situation like that is you're going to want to avoid any day that's like calm, cool, crisp days, just because your sound is going to be so magnified. So I'm going to look for like any sort of cover, whether that's, precipitation, which might pose challenging walking through that marsh because I'm assuming it's filled with water.
It's not bad right along the bottom edge, which there's a deer trail there too. But I think when I looked at it, I'm like, I think the hunting's in the middle.
Yeah. What I would likely do is pick the direction that I can access it with the wind in my face, because you're not going to want to walk through that with your wind just going, any random direction. You're going to have to give something up to hunt those areas.
Right.
And I would make sure that I have an access that is only giving up what I'm walking through. I don't want to be walking through it and then also having like a crosswind blowing my scent from west to east, and I'm walking due north. So now I'm giving up everything to the south and everything to the east.
Right.
You know, I'm going to want to be walking in. Let's say we are coming in from the south, approach it from the south with the wind right in your face out of the north. That way you're only giving up what you've walked through. And then you can get into that middle section and find anything that would give me, even if it is like 5 feet off the ground, you know, something that's going to allow me to see into that stuff a little bit better. Because, and I know everyone has different styles. For me, I'm going to be much more quiet, way more still if I'm in a tree,
Right.
even if it is 5 feet off the ground. You know, a guy like Zach Farrenbaugh would sit right on the ground and he would end up, you know, killing something in that spot.
Right.
For me, I know that's not, you know, I can't sit still that long on the ground. It's uncomfortable. I'm going to be shifting my weight, so I'm going to just do whatever I can to get in the tree just a little bit. And I'll probably just approach that as, hey, I'm going in at dark. I'm going to sit all day because I know how committed I have to be to get into this spot. And, you know, with every hour that goes by, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, hey, that access that I just took is settling down a little bit. So now, you know, maybe deer could come from the downwind or whatever. But yeah, it would be a spot, especially if it requires a lot of effort to get into. I'm going to get in there at 0 dark 30, sit there all day long, and just hope that, because I do feel like you get a little bit more random movement in areas like that.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where when do you shoot your shot?
yeah.
Right. And I don't know if it's like earlier on or, you know, a little bit later in the year or what, or, you know, probably a couple. I think you could go, like you said, you take the right precautions, go on with like a little wind cover or, you know, maybe a little bit of weather.
Probably not the spot you hunt on back-to-back days, but I do think you could probably get away with a couple sits in there.
Yeah. I like it. Yes, that was this thick, nasty, but with trail cutting through, no major buck sign. That was that note.
Yep.
That's a very recent observation. What about overlooked areas and getting unconventional?
Yeah.
You ever get weird with it?
Yeah. Overlooked areas are a couple different things here. Stuff that just doesn't look like deer country. So in my mind, the more open, the more better.
As far as being a little bit unconventional.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So I think about like areas that just like, hey, what are people drawn to in November? They're drawn to the hardwoods, they're drawn to pinches and funnels and like the beautiful creek bottom that's got white oak ridges dumping down into it. Like Deer Hunting 101 says go there. What are the places that look a little weird, look a little funky? Maybe you're very limited in spots that you can go to. That would be something I'd look into. The other thing in regards to overlooked spots would be anything that might even be right off the road if there's not a parking lot there.
Okay.
So I've hunted Illinois a couple years now, and also when I lived in Iowa, we would run into these situations. But like in Illinois specifically, some of the public land down there requires you to park in very specific. You need to park in a parking lot.
Oh, okay,
like
right.
You can't just park on the side of the road and walk in. So with that, like I would essentially I'd mark all those parking lots, and I'd figure out the distances between them and be like, hey, what is, you know, point A to point B? If it's like 3 miles from this parking lot to that parking lot, you split that difference. Maybe there is something 1.5 miles between them right off the road that no one's hunting. We had a spot when I lived
and just because you park there doesn't mean you have to hike in from there either.
Right.
You can cruise up the road and cut in where you want.
Yep, exactly. We had a spot when I lived in Iowa that we aptly called the road stand. You could literally see the gravel road. And I mean, it was one of the better spots that we hunted every year during the rut. It just the way that it's set up. It was kind of like a hardwood thicket that dropped down into the head of a ditch, and then you had CRP up on top, and there were a lot of deer that wanted to work the inside corner of that CRP, stay in the tree cover a little bit, and then they'd get pinched on the head of that ditch if they and they were literally crossing the road. I filmed Warb. He came to full draw on a buck. I don't think he didn't kill it. It busted us, but he came to full draw on a real nice 10-pointer. on a spot where like we were 60 yards from the vehicle that we drove in there. Like you could literally see it in the background of the footage. So yeah, I mean, some of those more overlooked spots, this was one that what tipped us off is there was a huge private piece that bordered this public chunk. And there was just a big thermal hub that kind of came off it and culminated on the public side, but everything came off the private. And I mean, it was legitimately 60 yards off the road, and we hung in that and had some really great sits. I know we ended up actually killing a nice buck in there the year after. So awesome spot, super close to the road. No one was hunting it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where, like, I toil with it when I see something like that. You know, maybe I see some sign close to the road, and I'm like, well, maybe that was made just, you know, only at night, or it's so obvious. I know other people have seen it, and I always wonder, are people seeing that and going? I think everybody's wondering the same thing, right? Are people seeing it? Well, this sucks. It's too close to the road. It's been overhunted, and they're walking by it, and everybody's walking by it, or and so you're like, oh, should I actually hunt that? And it's like, it's a toss-up.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, you don't know unless you try it. It's one of those things. Like, sometimes in those spots, the first time you go in there, you kind of feel like, am I a lunatic for trying this?
Right.
Until you try it. And then and that's how you discover those overlooked spots. Like, you don't discover an overlooked spot by not hunting it. You need to commit to it. You know, everyone that's ever found a road stand or something like that, the first time they went in there, they battled the exact same thought that you just mentioned. They went in there and they're like, man, there is a lot of good sign. It looks really good. Everything makes sense, but it's so close to the road. It's got to be happening at night until you go and hunt it. And then you find out for yourself.
Then you got to find out. And then with that, I guess another plus.
Yep.
Well, access is generally pretty bulletproof.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, as far as like how much you're going to blow up on the way in. It's like, you know, in and up you go.
And great spots for a reset day.
Yeah.
You know, like if you're looking to just get in the woods, but you don't want to wake up at 0 dark 30, you don't want to drive an hour and a half, whatever, hunt that what you think might be an overlooked spot close to home, sleep in, you know, go enjoy a 100-yard, 50-yard walk to the tree stand and get set up and see what happens. You got a better chance there than you do on the couch.
This is true. Calling, decoys, stuff like that. You know, that we'll say that 15th through the 25th time frame. What are you doing there? You backing off? You going pedal to the metal?
I'm always bringing my grunt call.
Right.
And I'll probably hike around with my rattling antlers like I do every year. Decoy, we kind of talked about it on the late October one. I'm going to err more on the side of bring the decoy in late October than I am in November because I want to be more mobile in November. And not that the decoy isn't going to work on the 15th through the 25th. I'm sure it can work just as great during that 10 days than it can on the 20th through the 30th of October. But I'm prioritizing mobility, so less stuff is more for me. So I'm going to leave the decoy in the truck. I'm probably even going to leave the rattling antlers in the truck too, just for the sake of like knowing that when I am going into the woods during that time of year, I want to be there for a good amount of time. So I'm going to prioritize, like, space in your pack is limited. I'm going to prioritize bringing like a Tupperware thing with a sandwich and an extra, you know, water bottle than bringing, you know, 90-inch set of rattling antlers, you know.
Right.
So
yeah, it's I think that's an important thing to point out too, is like get a good backpack that carries all your things, that carries enough. Like, more isn't always better, but enough to stay the day and not want to leave because you're hungry or thirsty or whatever. That's always a big deal.
I know.
To me.
I see all these different like mobile setups that people have, and like they don't have water bottle holders on them or water bladders in them.
Right.
And I'm like, how? Like,
I don't know.
I will actually die. Like, it's not for me.
I'd be drinking out of the water hole I put in.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it works for the deer. This looks delicious. Any camera strategy going on? You moving cameras?
Nope. I'm not paying attention to them. If it's a card that I have to check, so like a traditional camera, Unless I just happen to be walking past it, I'll check it. But I really, and cell cams, like I'll obviously check them when they come in. I have mine set where they come in every day at 8:30. I will look at it. I'm not going to like ignore it completely, but I'm also not going to chase pictures.
Okay.
I'm going to chase what I think to be like the right location on the map, because of terrain, because of bedding areas that I know are there, because of historical sign, because of historical behavior. I'm always going to prioritize those 4 things over a picture that happened last night at 10:30. Those pictures can be super helpful, and talking out of both sides of my mouth, you can get a little bit more repeatable patterns, so to speak, during that late rut time frame. So Thanksgiving of 2015, we had a buck that if it would have been a cell cam, and I would have been checking it. So I had a camera set up on a food plot, a Nebraska food plot behind our house when we lived in Iowa. The neighbor hit a really nice 150, 140 some inch 9-pointer. Early November, that deer went dark for like a week. Then he started showing up. He was showing up a lot at night. Then, and again, I'm not checking my cameras at this point, not because I'm like intentionally not doing it. I was just in different areas. I think I was actually tagged out. My wife still did have a buck tag, so she could have capitalized on this intel had I checked that camera. But when I finally pulled cameras, like right before gun season, which would have been December 3rd that year-ish, there was a stretch from like the 19th through like the 25th where that buck was in that Nebraska plot every single day. So like when I kind of poo-hoo the camera thing, it's not that they can't work. It's not that they're not giving you useful data. Right. It's just to me that like odds are better in my mind staying mobile than they are relying on finding that pattern. Like if I'm gonna prioritize a day of scouting, like speed scouting a property, or a day of just like running around and putting cameras all over the place, I'm going to opt for the speed scouting over the trail camera dispersion.
Okay.
Because I think I'm going to get more out of the day of speed scouting than I am trail cameras. So again, not poo-hooing the camera thing at all. I just think, especially anytime in November, you're going to get more out of covering ground and relying on just like kind of woodsmanship than you are, putting a camera over a scrape over a food plot and just hoping that it sends you good intel. So that's kind of where I stand on it. It can definitely work. I mean, that buck is a perfect example. If I would have had that camera have been a cell cam, or had I been checking that camera, right, that deer would have gotten shot at. Whether she would have got him or not, we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's, that's, it's like, had you been checked, that was, more traditional camera days. It's weird that we say that, or that I say that now.
So much has changed in the camera world in just the last 3 years.
Right. But then you're going in, you're checking, maybe he's not showing up every day because you're going in there and you're doing something that's, tipping him off. So, I mean, that's one thing to think about. How often are you just going in blind, not in blind in the dark necessarily, but just like, I'm checking out a new spot I have not seen before. I've had this pin on, marked for 5 years. I'm going for it.
Yeah, that time of year, that 15th through the 25th, I would say more often than not.
Okay.
Because I have kind of tried those tried and true spots, and I either know like, hey, this spot has been producing, it just hasn't happened here yet. Then I'm going to keep going to that. But let's say all those and when I say all those tried and true spots, I hunt a ton of public ground in this area. I maybe have like 2 that I would put in that bucket of like consistent year in and year out. And that's just because on public land, stuff changes so often. And it doesn't even need to be due to like logging or crop rotations on private or logging on public, but pressure on public. Like one of the spots specifically that I'm thinking about that used to be a go-to. I think I killed 4 bucks in 4 years, all in November, on this specific public piece. I haven't been to it in 3 years because then for 2 years it was just like terrible. It was overrun with hunters. I went in there in 2021, and this was the last year I went in there during bow season. there was a stand that someone was leaving in a tree. They cut down like an oak that was like 6-7 inches in diameter, and there were like 3 of those setups throughout the property. And I'm like, this place is getting ransacked. I'm not going to waste my time. So, and even if it is still good, I know it's getting hunted, so I'm just ruling that out. I don't want to like drive an hour to that spot because I know it's good and want to be so committed to it, only to get there and realize that there's somebody also there. Like, I'm going to err on the side of mobility and just finding that little, we kind of talked about it at the start, that little like 10-acre section in that Illinois example. I want to find that on some property that other people are probably hunting, but I'm not going to find that if I'm only going back to tried and true spots.
Right. Well, and I've seen a shift in that over time as well with, I mean, and I am very pro digital mapping software. I use it daily, right? But that's changed the game. Like, some of these little hidden gem spots that were good are easy to find. The access points are easy to find. You know, that stuff used to be. Now I have a lot more spots, but everybody else has those spots too, where sometimes you'd have a little bit of a hidden gem and you'd have it to yourself. Sure. Now I'm going to twist your mind up about this spot a little bit though, Eric. Yep. Maybe everybody else for the same couple years went in there and they got so frustrated with how pounded it was getting that they haven't been back either.
I know. It's always worth revisiting them, but I wouldn't make it something that is like, you know, I'm going to hitch my wagon to it.
Mm-hmm. What about, you know, you've hunted a mix over the years, this kind of later rut, later November type stuff, public versus private, right? Because, you know, you've got controlled access, you know maybe it's just you know who's been where, when, how much. Maybe you do have a couple cameras going. Yep. Are you still, you know, sticking with that game plan?
On the private thing, it's going to change a little bit. And this year actually is an interesting example for me because I do finally have access to a little private spot. And it is small. It's 32 acres. So there's only so many there. I have 2 existing like pre-hung stands on there, and then obviously the ability to kind of go mobile. But I would feel comfortable trying those spots day in and day out. Not every single day, but I would. I'm for example, I hung a great set this weekend that I think is going to be awesome. It will produce at some point. And it's a place that I can get in and out of without blowing everything up. So that is a spot that, like, hey, November 19th, I need a spot to go. I'm going to go there. Because it's a low impact with potential for very high reward, you know. And even if I don't see anything, I'm not going to feel like I did anything. Right. Because that specific property is very... if the deer are there, they're going to be on that. They're going to go past that stand. It's a very small. It's big crop country, small little draws and ditches. So I'm basically hunting a finger of hardwoods.
Okay.
So if I don't see them one day, I'm not going to be like, man, they're just not in here. Like, they actually probably just weren't in there that day. Like, they might go in there over the following evening and then be in there that next day.
Right. Yeah. It's not like you blew it up and you ruined it. They just weren't there that day.
Yep, exactly. So, yeah, that's where my tone kind of shifts a little bit, is on the private side of things. I'm still going to have the ability, though, like I said, to go mobile, you know. So whether that's like a small tree stand or, you know, bringing in a saddle, whatever, like, I want the ability to kind of move and adjust.
What's the latest you've seen? And I guess I'm not talking like, you know, kind of like that quotation mark second rut where you might get that late December, you know, early December doe that goes into heat or something like that. But what's the latest in November you've seen like
classic rut activity?
Like classic rut, dog and does, chasing, stuff like that.
Yep. The best examples I have here are going to come from Iowa because that's a state that's not affected by gun season. So November 27th, there was a buck.
November 27th.
Yeah, and it's right in there. It's like the 24th through the 27th. There was a buck that I missed the year prior. We called him the barber buck, the one that got away. This year was huge. I mean, we have we can include a photo of the shed here, but it's like a 10-point side.
Oh,
like
dear.
not a 10-pointer. It's like it would have, if he matched, he would have been a 10 by 10. He had triple brow, and then he had 6 with then an inline 3.
Naturally.
Yeah, he was a freak, absolute freak. But anyways, the reason I use him as an example is like the rack I described is a very unique and identifiable rack, right? Like there's not that many deer that look like that out there on the landscape.
You're not going to miss them.
Right. Well, you can miss him.
Well,
You're not going to misidentify him. I missed that deer in 2013 when I was an intern at Midwest Whitetail. The following year, I had to go back to college, finish up school. So there was a new class of interns that was down there hunting. And it was just right at 4 miles as the crow flies from where I missed that buck. They had the only sequence of trail cam photos they got of that deer. They got between the 24th and the 27th of November. He was with a doe, and he was just dogging this doe in daylight all around this ridge all day long. And then that deer went dark. Then another weird wrinkle in this story, just 'cause it's kind of a fun one. The following August, then now I'm working there full time. Warb goes in to check a camera, put a camera out in this different spot. And like 2 miles from where they got those photos, he's driving down this dirt road and he just happens to look like out of the, as he's driving, and the right side of that deer is in a cedar tree 10 yards off the road.
incredible.
So, yeah, that deer, he was very nomadic. It was like it was a big woods situation in a state that isn't really known for big woods. Iowa, you don't think big woods, hardwood whitetail country, but like this specific area had that. He was moving a bunch, and when it seemed every year, like late November, I missed him. I think November 17th and 13, and I think November 24th through the 27th, the following years when they got those photos of him. Where that deer was for the remaining 350 days, I have no idea, but he was out there somewhere. So
You just wonder what are they doing?
Yeah.
Where is he going?
Yeah.
He's obviously an old, mature deer.
Huge deer,
Good at living.
Yep, totally. That one that to this day like makes me wonder. That's a story for a different day, but that's a deer that keeps me up at night.
For sure. I mean, definitely, and this isn't like a secret, but it's hard when you've been hunting a lot in the earlier parts of November. It's hard to keep the positivity up. Yeah. All is not lost. I know one day here in Wisconsin, I want to say it was probably like the Thursday before gun season was going to start. So somewhere, in the back half of November for sure. But I had one of my best rut days on stand. I was hunting with a buddy of mine. We were on a piece of private and saw like a couple different little bucks doing just an absolute circuit around the property. I mean, we saw the same bucks like 3 times. Yeah. And eventually a pretty nice buck came through and completely just dogging a doe. Just, she'd take a step, he's taking a step, just following her everywhere. Gets in front of us. It's too thick for a shot. They get to, I guess, what would have been our left. His doe is coming straight, like they're going to be like 15, 20 yards. She's coming. And one of those little spikes that I'd seen like 3 times that morning gets in front of us. Yeah. She sees that spike and goes, I don't want to be harassed by you. Turns around and off she went, and the buck was right. Like, I have no doubt in my mind that if that spike hadn't have been right in front of us, they come
different
through.
Outcome.
Because 3 or 4 other deer had gone through right before her. She wanted to go where those other deer went, but then she ran into that dude and just like, I don't want you to harass me. I
mean, if you talk to a lot of people that are...
And that would have been, I want to say that was like the 21st or 22nd or something like that.
I mean, and this supports what you're talking about. If you talk to a lot of people that spend a lot of time hunting in states like Iowa or hunting like what I would call more managed, like lower pressured stuff, a lot of people will say that week of Thanksgiving is one of their favorite times for big mature bucks to be on their feet looking for the last estrus does.
Okay, interesting.
A lot of, and the theory, this isn't my knowledge. I'm getting this from people like, the Drurys or, anyone that is really spending a lot of time around, big mature deer. They'll attribute that week of Thanksgiving to some of the best time to kill a big mature buck, because a lot of the, 1, 2, 3, younger bucks have kind of like, they've wore themselves out.
Okay.
Whereas like the older bucks know that it's more of a marathon and less a sprint.
Okay.
And those are the deer that can be vying for those last estrus does. A little 2.5-year-old 80-inch 8-pointer isn't going to be the one that, snags that doe when you got a fully mature 5+-year-old buck in the area, so.
Well, and then I'd have to assume it's a little bit of a supply and demand issue as well. In fact, this is making me optimistic for that time frame. A big buck isn't going to walk 2 feet and find the next estrus doe.
He's got to cover a lot of ground.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So I mean, it is in a time where like your number of deer sightings might go down, but your quality of deer sightings might actually increase a little bit. So.
Well, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
But let's end on that.
And to be clear, I don't want to get there with a buck tag in my pocket.
No, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do everything I can. But I'm going to end with optimistically looking forward to that time frame if I get there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can be the best time of the year.
There we go. All right. Well, Eric, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Hopefully you're getting some of this, something out of this, kind of late season rut tactics. Hopefully you don't get there either, but if you do, maybe you got something in your pocket, your little bag of tricks that you can use. And let us know, man. What are we're here to learn, people. If you got some late rut tips, tactics,
we also want to see your photos too.
Oh, yeah.
So if you end up tagging a buck this November, we're sharing a couple of our favorite photos on the Vortex Optics Instagram. You can get involved by simply tagging at Vortex Optics and using hashtag Vortex Nation in your post. So if you shot a buck, you wouldn't mind being featured on the Vortex Instagram, drop that in a post, tag us, use the hashtag in there, and you just might be reposted on the Vortex IG page.
Yeah, I think we're sharing a few of those like every Friday throughout November, something like that. Yep. So
celebrate deer camp with us.
Celebrate deer camp with us. And don't make me too jealous. No. Shoot. Get your buck.
Good luck.
Good luck out there, everybody. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye.